that is what we discussed. So tonight we're going to be going over Hegelian dialectic. This is such an interesting topic. It really is. It's a divisive topic, even within the prophecy community, which is interesting. But it is a very interesting one, and it's going to be a fun one. So, having a good understanding of the various tools within the philosophical triad that is the Hegelian dialectic will be beneficial to seeing what's being done in various levels. So again, why are we talking about this? Why do we cover these random weird things that seem maybe on the outside they're not worth diving into or discussing in this type of way? Why am I so weird and always picking random things like this? Well, because I think if we have an understanding of where they come from and how they're implemented, they may help us not only identify what's going on out in the world today, but also possibly help somebody else when we're witnessing to them, because it might come up in a question that they have and we can answer it. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and cover three different aspects of this: how it's used, how the Hegelian dialectic is used politically, geographically or geopolitically, they're kind of one and the same there, and religiously. Now there's a bunch of other ways that it's used, but I think those three are the good ones to cover, because it kind of covers a lot of different spots. And so my goal is to give a background on where it comes from, what it is, how it's used, and of course give examples to those three subjects that I just listed. So first question for you guys, maybe you guys know the answer to this: where does the Hegelian dialectic come from, and what is it? You guys know who came up with it? You guys know who started this thing and what it is? Well, right off the bat, we are met with a misconception. And this is an interesting one, because even the term or the phrase, the philosophical outlook of Hegelian dialectic, is often misquoted. They kind of have an idea of how it works, but it's often misquoted, and because it's not even where you think it would come from. What if I told you the Hegelian dialectic actually isn't from a guy named Hegel? Many people attribute it to this guy because they think it came from him, but it did not. Who is Hegel? This is Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And yes, there's no E at the end of George. I double checked because I know somebody's going to say, you forgot the E. No, I didn't. But this is Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, born 1770, died 1831. And Hegel was a German philosopher who was notorious for writings on various philosophies of art, culture, religion, history, politics, etc. But was a nightmare for anyone to actually understand his writings, which I think is where all the confusion came from. If you guys ever get a whim to go and look up some of his writings, like not like summaries or references of his writings, go and find pictures of his writings. No wonder everybody's confused, because this dude I think it was a subject of he spent too much time thinking about philosophy, and so his brain just scrambled and he had no idea of actually how to write it down. That's my personal opinion. But yeah, so basically philosophies on all these different types of things, but nobody could really understand his writings. It took a very long time for people to decipher what he was trying to say. He is often labeled for the Hegelian dialectic triad of problem, reaction, solution, but that idea is never actually found in his writings. What's interesting about this is he's often attributed, and you can go on YouTube and find like people who have spent 50 years as philosophers, and they still attribute that to him. His writings never even discuss, not even the names of those things, but even the actionable points of it. He never even discusses it. So what is Hegel's idea, and how did it even become to this? So let's take a look at Hegel's triad. He actually came up with this, which is abstract, negative, and concrete. And so abstract means it is what it is. So you have an object and you're looking at it and you go, well, I see that object, so it is what that object is. Then you have the next spot, which is the negative, which is it is what it is not. And so you're going to sit there and go, well, it's not this because I look at it and it's this. So it's not this because I look at it and it's this. The reason why it's this is because these characteristics, these principles make up what I know it as and what I'm looking at. And then concrete is, it is what it is because it's both. So abstract plus negative means construct equals concrete. So give an example, because that might be confusing in itself. It took me a while to get it. So I actually have a prop. Yes, I'm using a prop tonight. Isn't it great? I don't usually get to do props. It's great. It's just a cup, but still. Okay, so first on the list, so we get an idea of what this is. Abstract. It is what it is. What does that mean? Okay. Got here. Can you guys see it? All right. I probably shouldn't have picked a black cup and a black shirt. That doesn't work. Okay, so it's a cup. It is what it is. Why is it what it is? Because I'm looking at it right now. It's in my hand and it's a cup. Everybody can tell that that's a cup. So that's the first one. It's just observation, understanding what's going on. Second, negative. It is what it is not. What does that mean? See, we're getting all philosophical with this stuff. Negative. Okay, so what is it? Well, it's a cup. The cup is black. It's cylindrical. It holds liquid and other objects. It's smooth. It's solid. And so that's what we have. While these properties aren't a cup individually, together simultaneously, they are a cup. So what does that mean? Well, it's black. Well, so is my phone. But that's not a cup, right? No. It's cylindrical. Well, so is this bottle of water, but that's not a cup. It holds liquid and stuff. Well, again, I have my computer mouse. I don't want to lift it up because it's plugged in. It's black, but it doesn't hold anything. So basically, the reason why this is a cup, because I can sit there and observe that it is a cup, and the fact that it has all these principles and characteristics all simultaneously working together at the same time, at this moment in time in front of me, we can determine that it is a cup. So if you take both the negative as well as the abstract and you put them together, you can determine that the concrete output is, in fact, it is a cup, and it does exactly what we say it is. Does that make sense? I think that's probably the best way that I could describe it. So basically, concrete, this cup is a cup because these properties exist simultaneously together in front of me at this exact moment in time. And that's what it is. That is Hegel's Triad, Hegel's dialectic. Does that sound anything remotely like Hegelian dialectic that we know it to be? Not exactly. So how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point? How did Hegel's dialectic, this triad of philosophical determining what a cup is by these three notions, how on earth did it become the psychological and philosophical weapon that we know it as today? Well, for that, we must say hello to this guy. This actually is the guy that we know the Hegelian dialectic come from. This is Johann Gottlieb Fichte, also a German philosopher, born 1762, died 1814. That's the guy who came up with it. Fichte was actually the one to write about the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis triad, or as we know it, the Hegelian dialectic. Let's take a look at this dude's triad. So this is actually what we know Hegelian dialectic to be. So what he did is he took, he was a studier of Hegel's writings, and so he had an idea that he branched off of Hegel's triad, which has nothing to do with this. And so he put it more into what we would call Fichte's provocation. And this is ultimately what we get is Fichte's triad here. We get thesis, antithesis, as well as synthesis. Thesis is a collective harmony. Collective harmony, as in we have societal rules that we have today. And so everybody just goes along with those rules, the laws and everything like that, in a collective harmony. Everybody just naturally believes in what the laws are and stuff like that, for the most part, give or take, obviously. But for the most part, the collective harmony is they just go along with them, and it's understood and accepted broadly across the society that it's in. So it is a collective harmony. They have an idea that these are the rules in place, and so we follow them. So that would be your thesis. Number two, antithesis says individual thought. This is the point where people within that society then begin to have an individual thought that is against that collective harmony, that is against the original thesis. So they come up with an idea that is different from the other idea. So it's the opposite, the polar opposite of that. And so there then becomes a clash of ideologies at that point. I'll explain it a little bit further. I just want to make sure we get through these first. Then there's synthesis. So basically what happens is those two, the thesis and the antithesis, they battle it out, they clash, and they come to a quote unquote compromise. Any of this sounding a little bit more familiar to what we know the Hegelian dialectic to be? Yes. So ultimately, how this happened was Fichte went back into history and saw Socrates of what was going on during the time of Greece. The rules were the rules. Society just went along with it in a collective harmony. And then there's this guy that comes around and starts planting ideas into individuals within that society. What is justice? What is the rule of law? What is this religious system? What is a club sandwich? I don't know, something like that. And so he starts putting these ideas into individuals. And so they start to have their own thoughts about that conflict with the original rule of law. And so there then begins to have uprisings that seem to happen. And so one side must reach an agreement with the other side in a form of compromise in order to progress. And so basically what is determined, what he explains it as, is this is history. This is how history progresses, or this is the history of history, is where it's always one ideology and another ideology coming together in conflict in order to progress to the next step. And then it happens again, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. And so this is how we progress through history, is through this idea. And so if we take a look at this, it says the progression of societies is built upon conflict between accepted norms and the questioning of those norms. So you got a thesis and you got an antithesis. The standard thesis meets the individual antithesis, which must settle on a compromising synthesis to progress, or to progress. This is often recognized as history of history and is found within, you guessed it, Marxism. Would you believe me if I told you that all the guys that kind of worked around this triad, this belief system of Hegel and Fichte, along with other people like Kant and some other ones as well, they all of their ideas and stuff folded into Marxism? And this is why we have the Hegelian dialectic today. This is why we continue to move in that direction, because they took this philosophy and applied it to their political ideology in order to bring in more people to counteract the rule of law in order to move society in the direction that they want to go. And so ultimately, that is how we know the Hegelian dialectic to work today. So, you guys experts on it yet? Because I'm going to have a quiz at the end of this, and you won't be able to sign out of this live stream until you pass the quiz. So you guys better be up on it. So no, it sounds complicated, but it's really a lot more simple than it sounds. I'm probably just explaining it terribly, but I told you it was going to be an interesting one tonight. We're talking philosophy of all things. I mean, really crazy stuff. Okay, so what is put forward is the philosophy of historical progression, as I explained. One side meets the other side, come to a conclusion, they progress, and then another side. So the synthesis then becomes a thesis again, and then there's somebody who counters that, and it just moves up and up and up and up. This is how history moves along. We're history of history. And depending on the arena of conflict, it can be used on large-scale topics such as religion and science and culture and politics and all this stuff. That's how we progress with all this stuff. You got science conflicts with religion on something, and then that progresses forward. Then you've got things where it's like politics conflict with art on one thing, and then they got to move forward. And so it can be all these huge topics and subjects that it's moving things forward. But it can even be used in our daily lives. How many of y'all are married? Did y'all know when someone has an idea and then the other one has a different idea? You are now in the form of a Hegelian dialectic in your own house. Would you believe me if I told you that? Because that's exactly what it is. It's even small little things that happen in our own lives. Now, hopefully none of you are using it to manipulate your partner. Don't be doing that. Don't be manipulating your spouses over there. But ultimately, it's just another form of moving forward in your relationship. So that's how it goes. And all the men, you better be saying, "Happy wife, happy life." I'm just saying. But it could be used in your marriage, work, business, depending on the area of business that you're in. It happens all the time when it comes to that stuff. Even backyard barbecues. If you got the bros just hanging out in the backyard, barbecuing and whatnot, somebody comes up with an idea, somebody comes up with I don't agree with that. You guys hash it out. That could be a form of it as well. So it's not just a huge thing that we can look at it as. It's also little things that we come across in our own lives too. So with that, though, again, we're not necessarily here to cover philosophy, but I think that is an important thing to understand on this. Hopefully I didn't lose anybody. But the matter at hand is how this has been turned into a psychological weapon against the minds of society. How on earth has this been done? Well, that root of Marxism eventually produced a union of the philosophy as well as real world action. So what we know as thesis, antithesis, as well as synthesis became what we know in the action form of problem, reaction, solution. Problem, reaction, solution. This is the action form of the Hegelian dialectic, which was formed off of the philosophical version that we just covered. And this is what everybody knows it as. So, with the understanding of history and the philosophical dialectic woven within, the idea of creating a problem, then that same person who created the problem then offers the solution. That is what we know as problem, reaction, solution. You create the problem, you then have society react, and then you then offer the solution to the problem that you originally created. This is a very simplistic foundation of what Marxism ultimately is. And so rather than just letting history naturally progress on its own, you issue the problem, reaction, solution. And when you implement it, it is now being used not to naturally advance society, but it's actually to artificially direct not only society, but also entire countries in any way that they so choose. And so when you have the ability to control all the offices of the countries, you can then have the ability to issue the Hegelian dialectic or the problem, reaction, solution in order to move not only society, but the entire country in the direction that you want them to go. Whether they want some countries to go up and some countries to go down, exactly as we're seeing right now, they can do that according to who they have in charge and issuing this out. This triad could be deployed in many areas in many ways. And guess who heads this up? Bada bing, bada boom. You're right. It is the Freemason Society, the Luciferian group. And we can see here, this image has so much in there. We can do an entire show on this if we wanted to. We're not going to tonight because we got other things to get to. But ultimately, we can see that there is the left and the right, as well as the single crown above them. And one of the most famous creeds, one of the most famous Masonic creeds of the 33rd degree Freemason, the highest order in there, is Ordo Ab Chao, or order from chaos, or order out of chaos. Also, along with that is the saying of lux in tenebrae, which is light from darkness. So I often, whenever I reference Hegelian dialectic, sometimes I say problem, reaction, solution. Sometimes I say order out of chaos. It's ultimately meaning the same thing, where they create the chaos and then they issue the answer to bring back order from said chaos that they just implied. This is something that is the foundation, literally the foundational saying for Freemasonry is order out of chaos. And ultimately, this is their version of that Hegelian dialectic. And these are the ones that we know are all wrapped up in moving society and countries and the world in the direction of what Satan ultimately wants for his coming 15 minutes of fame, the Antichrist beast system, and so on and so forth. This is the same stuff that we hear all these, like politicians and stuff all the time, where it's like, never let a good crisis go to waste, and all these types of things, because ultimately what they did is they created the crisis, and then they're going to give you the answer that's going to take you in the direction that they want you to go. And so we can see this actively being used in front of us, as well as we can see it actively, or it was used back in historical times. And the Freemasons are all wrapped up in this, absolutely all wrapped up. They plaster it everywhere. Why? Because they don't need to hide. Just like today, we look at a lot of the events that are going on today. It's just Satan's just out on the catwalk strutting his stuff. It doesn't need to hide anymore. He doesn't need to hide anymore because society's been actively accepting it. Why? Because they've been moved and conditioned and indoctrinated, mind controlled, brainwashed into not only accepting these things, but now following and participating in these things. This is a long philosophical play, but it's working. So let's look at a few examples, real life examples of how this is being used. Remember those 3 topics I told you that we were going to cover? Let's go over them. Religious, political, geographical, or geopolitical, however you want to put it. So let's go over them. Let's start with geographical and geopolitically. Let's start with this one because I think this is a key one that we've seen in history and we are seeing today. I know, right? Crazy. So this is a major one that has been leading the way with forming the one world government for a very, very long time. As we know, I mean, there's so many different things that we could talk about on this subject alone. But in order to get this one world government up and running, not only do you have to have every country under the belt and all in lockstep moving the same direction, but you have to have a series of historical events all unfold over a very long period of time in order to get these things done. One main point is the Freemasons' 3 World Wars, also known to be written by Albert Pike. Now, there is this thing going around because the last time I talked about this, a couple people commented and says, that was debunked. It wasn't written by Albert Pike and all this type of stuff. Well, here's my thing. If it wasn't written by Albert Pike, the date of which we know it was written by, which it could have been written by a Catholic cardinal at the time, because those are the 2 things. Was it Albert Pike? Was it this cardinal? I can't remember the guy's name. But if we look at the date, even of when that was written, it was still written before World War I even took place. So just because you're going to say it's debunked because it may have not been written by who we thought it was, that does not get rid of the fact that these things have unfolded exactly as it was written back before these things even happened. And that in itself is enough credibility to go, something is up with this if it's unfolding exactly as they say. So that's something that I just want to put out there right now before people say it was debunked. No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. So what is the letter that I'm talking about? This is Pike's letter, Albert Pike's letter written in 1871. It talks about 3 world wars, planned world wars that they wanted to get done. This is the first one. It says the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agentua or agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. Question, did that happen? You're darn tootin' it happened. It absolutely did happen. We take a look at what during that period of time we saw the war, and then we saw the aftermath of what took place. Now, there's several things of the aftermath. We'll get to a couple of those in just a minute. But the main thing is this is when communists started busting out. It started booming. Atheism increased after World War I. Religions started splintering and bursting into other denominations and stuff because they didn't want to hold to orthodox beliefs. That's exactly what they wanted as well. And it just started exploding. Not only did Russia just fall into this communistic just crazed machine, but it started moving its way across many different countries as well. And it started spreading. The idea started spreading. It became different things. Communism, Marxism, fascism, socialism, they're all the same isms. They just have different kind of points, different coats of paint on them ultimately. And this is exactly what they said. So World War I, nailed it. Accomplished it. Again, there's a couple more things we'll get to at the end of this. Let's keep going with the letter. Number 2, the Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists, which they just created, and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. So there's many areas to what's going on with this. First of all, Second World War needed to bring about basically a difference between the political Zionists. This is where things kind of start getting confusing for some people. There's a difference between the political Zionism and then, as we know, the biblical Zionism. As Christians who hold to dispensationalism and throw away, the replacement theory and all that type of stuff, we are biblical Zionists. We are for God's people and God's land. Political Zionism, however, is a completely different monster. That's when you start getting into things like the Rothschild family and stuff, which we'll get to in just a minute. So these are different things. But ultimately, what they needed to bring about on this was the creation of a political Zionist institute, a sovereign state of Israel within, at that time, they deemed Palestine, the Arab area. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom. That's where they needed a giant head clash between the atheistic communism style as well as the fundamental biblical style that's going on. That worked, nailed it. And then, of course, the Christendom needed to be in balance before the time comes, before they ultimately want to try and destroy it, along with the Jews and Islam and atheism in the third thing. So they needed to hold it back. Well, I actually have a point when I get to the religious side of how they did that, ultimately, thanks to the Rockefellers. Great times. But ultimately, that's what happened during World War II. Israel, as we know, 1948, Israel became a nation. That was prophecy being unfolded right then and there. It happened in a day. Then we understand that communism and Christendom absolutely started going head to head on that type of stuff. There was an increase in atheism again after World War I, as well as an increase in Islam as well. Why is that important? Because the coming Third World War the coming Third World War. Oh, boy. We're watching this one get locked and loaded and getting ready to fire off. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentura of the Illuminati between the political Zionists, State of Israel, and the leaders of the Islamic world. What are we watching right now? That's going to be the powder keg that launches World War III, am I right? Seems Albert Pike was. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Well, we know that that's not going to unfold exactly like that because our Bible says different, but this is the point of what they're trying to do to get World War III going. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on the issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. That seems to be what we're gearing up for, and that seems to be what the Bible tells us as well. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Again, it's like we're reading something from Revelation here. Then everywhere, the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. That sounds like the Antichrist. You would be right. Brought finally out in the public view, again, when he gets revealed. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will now follow the destruction of the Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time, which we know Christianity will not be, and neither will the Jews. But we can see from this, not only did World War I unfold exactly as they planned, exactly as they orchestrated, problem, reaction, solution, but so did World War II. And what we are witnessing right now in front of us is the culmination of World War III unfolding almost exactly as he described. The events seem to be in that way, but the outcome is going to be a little bit different because they're talking about the extermination of Christians and the Jews and stuff, which that's not going to happen. But we're seeing this all unfold. And this is the perfect display of not only historical, but active Freemason Hegelian dialectic problem, reaction, solution, all unfolding right here. In order to institute each phase of this Luciferian global order, they developed a problem or an illusion of a problem, either through false flags, political blackmail, wealth transfers, etc. And each one so far has happened accordingly to what this letter tells us that the Freemasons were cooking up. They then react, usually with the war solution, which order out of chaos. You create an entire world of chaos and it allows them to institute the solution from that chaos. And afterwards, they provided the solutions to supposedly, quote unquote, fix these problems. But ultimately, what they were doing is they were progressing history for the next step in the Antichrist beast system. They are progressing history to prep for their next event that they wanted or want to produce and take place ultimately. And they move societies and countries into the direction that they need to in order to get this stuff done. World War I, we just discussed one of it, but also to come from that was the League of Nations, which was a groundbreaking, very extremely important part to getting this one world government going up to move forward. Because after World War II, you had them become the League of Nations, then became the United Nations, and look at what they're doing today. World War I was also that first step to getting the state of Israel back up and going, which ultimately came to that conclusion, that finality, after World War II. How did that happen? There's a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, and a lot of confusion of how that ultimately played out. Who's involved with it? How did it happen? Was it just something that occurred? Well, remember, God uses even the most evil in order to advance things forward in his prophetic word. And ultimately, we see that after World War I, like a year before it ended, not even a year, a couple months before it ended, we saw the direction of the European government start to reach out to specific people and family in order to get the ball rolling on World War or on the state of Israel. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the Balfour Declaration that was written to none other than the Rothschild family in order to get them to prepare to move political Zionism into the state of Palestine at that point, into the Arab area. Let's hear directly from Jacob Rothschild himself.
In modern Jewish history, and it begins with 3 words. Dear Lord Rothschild.
Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet.
Why was it that this letter was sent by the Foreign Secretary to your great-uncle Walter?
It's an interesting question because it was primarily a movement from Eastern Europe, but they didn't clarify who was in charge of that movement. And in addition, it was, after all, in Great Britain. So they felt that the Rothschild family should be the one to whom it was addressed. And Walter was Lord Rothschild, and he was a Zionist. And those really are the background reasons.
So Walter received the Balfour Declaration, and I have a copy here. And I wonder if I could possibly ask you to read it for us.
Yes, indeed. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur Balfour.
All right, so we can see here that in order to prepare the way to create the state of Israel in order to advance to the next world war, which begins between the Muslims and the state of Israel, you have to create that. And so what happened? Well, you had the Freemasons, you had the Freemasons within the European government, as well as you had the Rothschild banking family. They worked together in order to place Israel back where they were supposed to be ultimately. But what they did is within this declaration, which was in between World War I and World War II, which was the start of this, they had to prepare it, so get it in there. And then part of it was, well, the Jews can't disturb the Arabs at that point. They can't start doing things with Islam. So what did we start to see after that? Well, we know the Freemasons and the Rothschilds and all these people control the media as well as they help set up the government within Israel. Again, separate political Zionism and biblical Zionism, guys. Separate the man government that is there as opposed to God's people and God's order. And so all of this is manipulation and getting things in preparation for eventually World War II, which brought us the United Nations, as well as started forming different alliances between countries, as well as did a lot on the economic side. That's a whole entire thing on itself. We're not even going to get into that. But also then established the state of Israel, which then was the key part to getting ready for World War III, which was completely orchestrated by these Freemasons and Luciferians and satanic groups. And ultimately, this was all these wars, all the planning, all the death was all part of this Luciferian Hegelian dialectic to move things forward in order to control countries and get ready to establish this one world Antichrist beast system. Literally all of it orchestrated. And it's all based upon a philosophical idea. This is a cup. I kid you not. I kid you not. This is ultimately what's going on. Remember, God uses even the most evil people in order to let his plan move forward. It's crazy. It's crazy, but this is what's going on. We can see that this next world war is perfectly set up because using the Hegelian dialectic, the Luciferians managed to accomplish everything that they planned prior. Now, religiously, there are many ways we could go on this one. I mean, we could go all over the board when it comes to what's going on with the Hegelian dialectic in the religious side of things. But I'm just going to bring up one by the name of Harry Fosdick and his religious, basically just existential religious overturning of fundamentalism with his sermon called "Shall the Fundamentalists Win?" Now, I've gone over this dude in the End Times New Age series, but this is a good one in the change, the pivot for churches and fundamentalism and biblical principles. So Harry Emerson Fosdick, born 1878, died in 1969. He was most notorious for writing this sermon, which caused a major crack in the church of, well, today now ultimately, but back then, called the "Shall the Fundamentalists Win?" Harry Fosdick was a liberal progressive preacher. He was one that subscribed to humans and Christianity needs to progress with the times and should not be stuck within the box of the Bible. And so he was doing everything he could to try and do that on his own. He couldn't do it. So what happened? Well, in steps Rockefeller. The Rockefeller family steps in, basically buys him a church, a very nice, large church, and starts getting everybody to start going to Fosdick's church that he was preaching at. And what they started doing, Hegelian dialectic, started implanting individual ideas. You guys remember? Individual thoughts within the collective harmony. So progressive and liberal thoughts into the church that subscribed to fundamental Christianity, biblical principles. And that starts to spread massively. And so the problem was that the Christian church was holding too strongly to fundamental Christian principles. They were having issues in the areas of progressive Christianity and the political system. They needed to start getting these Christians to back away from Christian principles and start progressing forward in order for the political and the religious systems to move forward. So this was causing that slowdown. The reaction was to begin to divide by planting those individual thoughts within the fundamentalists of the churches, thanks to now Rockefeller-funded Harry Fosdick and his liberal progressive movement. The solution in the end for the Rockefellers was a massive split that began causing the creation of more popular progressive churches that placed progressivism over biblical principles. And so we started seeing churches go in the direction of, well, society and culture is going this way. We need to be more tolerant. We need to be more accepting. We need to start doing this. I don't necessarily agree with what the Bible says about this issue, so we're going to go ahead and start our own denomination in our own area, and we're going to start preaching it this way. And all of a sudden, that fundamental biblical principle foundation that was holding together for started shattering and splintering beyond all recognition. And so that's when we started seeing things progress to what we see now in the modern church, where we have the accepting of homosexuality, and we have drag shows going on in the church, and even things where accepting things like the NAR and New Age and all these different types of things going on. It's just completely falling apart where it's compromising. Well, again, we look at this, what's the synthesis? It's compromise. And this is ultimately what we see going on in a modern church today. How did that happen? The Rockefellers deployed the Hegelian dialectic through Harry Fosdick, and there goes the church. There goes the church. Now, this one actually plays a major role into the next one, politically, the Hegelian dialectic politically. With the fundamental church now divided and splintering more and more and more as time moves on, the deployment of the political Hegelian dialectic could speed up. There's no more wall in the way at this point. The creation of the two-party system, where the left begins to move even further left and the right then moves quicker and more boldly to the left, is because of the compromising of biblical values. Christian churches became more inclined to accept the unbiblical because the other side was moving so far the other direction. They were put into the predicament of, well, I have no choice but to compromise on my biblical principles in order to just keep the other people from winning. Does this sound familiar? Well, this was going on way back then as well. We eventually got to the point where it doesn't matter what the right does, the Christians will put support behind them just to keep the other side from winning. This is 100% crafted, 100% orchestrated. And in order for this to actually gain the momentum and the speed that we have today, well, that religious deployment from the Rockefellers had to happen. And it did. And so it's just started moving more in that direction because it's about taking society and drifting them, guiding them without them even knowing it into the direction that they want to do. And so we see that being deployed today. What they don't realize is both sides are controlled in order to move society in that direction. That's how you do it. Again, if you can orchestrate global world wars, you don't think that they can orchestrate a political system? You don't think that they can control that political system, own both parties, give the illusion of one is different than the other, shatter fundamental Christianity and have people compromise on biblical principles, and then just send them out to their death? At that point, they're voting against the Bible and they're voting for their own enslavement, and they don't even realize it. It's perfectly crafted. It's evil as all get out, but it's perfectly crafted. And this is how they deploy it in all the other countries around the world in order to get the world to go in the direction that they want it to go. Again, who are they? Well, that, of course, is the Freemasons. This is the double-headed eagle. Remember, we just looked at it here. Well, it's back. It was adopted by Freemasonry in 1759. The origin of the double-headed eagle actually comes from ancient Macedonia, possibly rooted in Samaria. So that should tell you everything that you need to know. And it was adopted by Freemasonry in 1759. And the double-headed eagle, a powerful symbol of the order, represents the unity of opposites and the merging of dual powers. Its two heads gaze in opposite directions, left and right, symbolizing a comprehensive dominion going all the way left and all the way right, overseeing both past and future. Yeah, and the esoteric and exoteric realms. And right again. This is the Hegelian dialectic that has been put into society nowadays. And we are even seeing, not only are we seeing the repercussions of Albert Pike's Freemason letter in the World Wars, but we're also seeing the repercussions of the Rockefellers funding Harry Fosdick, which now we're seeing the repercussions in our political system, where we have Christians and churches that are standing there throwing their support behind groups that don't stand for anything biblical, only because they believe that that's the only option that we have in order to not let the other side win, even though both sides are completely controlled by the same group of Luciferian cabals. They've just been duped by the Hegelian dialectic. It's never changed. The same group that weaponized thesis, antithesis, and synthesis are still using that same strategy today. This is a cup. Without even realizing it, the phrase history repeats itself actually takes on a much deeper meaning than I think we truly realize. There are countless other examples of this weaponized dialectic system out there. The climate agenda that was formed by the Club of Rome in order to unite all global governments together in order to create a global government, or one singular global government, all to fight the problem that is climate change. That's part of it as well. We saw what happened during the Crusades, which was actually a satanic Gnostic group of that, nothing Christian about that all, in order to go and slaughter, all in the name of Sophia and the Baphomet. You see what's going on with the Ukraine conflict. That's another one that's going on geopolitically, geographically, where they say that the problem is Russia and China, so-and-so, even though they're actually part of the same group under their control, but they're giving that illusion in order to manipulate and move chess pieces around the board, like the Ukraine conflict. There's the war of northern aggression, or as the history books write, the Civil War. Ultimately, it had nothing to do with slavery, but actually had to do with removing the Confederacy government system, which was how the Founding Fathers wanted it to be, to bring in the federal government system, because in order for the United States to move in the direction that they need to, they couldn't be separate and with local power. They had to be under one singular power, and that's what that was as well. 9/11, I'll just blatantly say it, completely orchestrated. If you really want to dive into it, take a look at who was behind it, CIA and the Mossad, and look at what came from that. After that happened, the entire country of the United States threw themselves behind the Patriot Act without even realizing what it really was. Hegelian dialectic: problem, reaction, solution. Ultimately, that's what happened. War on drugs. Do we really need to go into that? The 2008 financial crash. I actually talked about this during the Tearing Down the Curtain episode, where that is complete controlled demolition of the dollar in order to help bring in the crash of the global financial system, to help bring it in. 2008 financial crash was indeed the trigger for that event, and so on and so on. This is the history that you will never read in the history books. But this is the philosophical, psychological weapon that has been deployed by the Luciferians over a very long period of time, and it is working flawlessly. And as we know, it will up to a certain point, because this is ultimately what is constructing this Antichrist beast system. God is using evil people in order to make his word and prophecy come true. But this is what's happening. Each of these were problems created by the Luciferian cabal in order to advance and direct society in the direction that they want. What began as philosophical turned into psychological, to move into action and change. It's being used more today than ever before. And this is why we must always, I don't care what the subject is. I'm not just talking about one subject, because I know some people will take it in that direction, but I'm talking about everything. Always stand for biblical principles and never compromise on them. The moment you do, you have just fallen into their Hegelian dialectic trap. Don't do that. Even in your everyday life, don't compromise on those principles. Stick to what the Word of God tells us to do. That's it. That's it. Told you it was going to be a crazy one tonight, guys. I told you it was going to be a crazy one. But this is, again, I don't know how far everybody's knowledge of Hegelian dialectic goes, but it's really a wild ride when you dig into the subject itself, not only where it came from, but how it's been deployed on so many different areas of life during so many different periods of history. It's crazy. It's insane, to say the least. But yeah, so I hope that answers some questions. I probably lost some people in the beginning when I was doing the philosophical stuff. I'm sorry. Philosophy is just to begin with, ultimately. But I think it was important to at least, have an idea of how it works. So, yeah, I can see some people saying their head hurts and they need a nap, and head is spinning, and sorry. Sorry. Hopefully, maybe go back and rewatch and see if it'll help clear things up. Email me if you need to. But yeah, I think it's an interesting subject. It's a different subject, but it's so key. Again, Hegelian dialectic is one of those things that we just kind of throw around, which, again, I'm not saying anybody's using it wrong when I say that, but sometimes we throw it around without really realizing the effect that it has and has had on so many things. The manipulation of people's minds through this philosophical idea is mind-boggling, ultimately mind-boggling. So